A group of white supremacists harass a black man at a bar, thinking he's just a random civilian. The air inside Sullivan's bar was thick with cigarette smoke and the scent of cheap whiskey. Neon lights flickered above the counter, casting a dull glow over the patrons hunched over their drinks. The place was a hole-in-the-wall joint on the outskirts of town, a favorite among locals who preferred to keep to themselves. There was an unspoken rule here. Strangers weren't always welcome, especially ones who didn't look like they belonged. The black man sitting at the bar was well aware of this fact. He could feel the weight of the stairs on his back the moment he walked in. It wasn't the first time he had stepped into a place where he was unwelcome, and it wouldn't be the last. His posture was relaxed, his grip firm on the glass of bourbon in front of him. He swirled the amber liquid slowly, watching the way the dim light refracted through the glass. At a corner booth, a group of men sat with their drinks, eyes locked on him. Their conversation had died down the moment he walked in. The leader, a burly man with a buzz cut and a thick, jagged scar running along his jawline, leaned back in his seat, arms stretched out over the booth. He wasn't smiling, but there was something almost amused in the way he studied the newcomer. "I don't recognize him," one of the men muttered. "Neither do I," said another, cracking his knuckles. The leader exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the table. "This ain't exactly the kind of place someone like him just stumbles into by accident." The others nodded, their expressions darkening. The mood at the table had shifted. A silent agreement passed between them. At the bar, the black man lifted his glass to his lips, taking a slow sip. His eyes flicked to the dusty mirror behind the counter. He could see them watching him, their reflections distorted by the grime streaked across the surface. He didn't react. He had been in worse situations before. The bartender, an older man with a permanent scowl, wiped down the counter with a rag that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. He hesitated near the newcomer, then leaned in slightly. "You sure you want to be here tonight?" he said under his breath. The black man set his glass down gently, his fingers tapping the rim. "Why wouldn't I?" The bartender's gaze flicked toward the men at the booth. They were standing now, stretching, cracking their necks, making a show of their movements. A slow, deliberate approach. Because Sullivan's doesn't do trouble and trouble is walking this way. The black man exhaled softly. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. The first man reached the bar, setting his beer bottle down beside him with an unnecessary amount of force. The bottle wobbled before settling. The room seemed to quiet just a little. The jukebox in the corner continued to play some old country song, but the volume felt lower. Conversations at nearby tables hushed. "Hey friend," the man said, his tone mockingly friendly. "You look lost." The black man took another sip of his drink before answering. "I'm not." The second man, a wiry figure with a twitchy hand that constantly adjusted his baseball cap, let out a short laugh. "See, I don't know about that. You don't exactly look like the regulars around here." The leader stepped up now, resting his arm on the counter as he leaned in slightly. His breath smelled like stale beer and chewing tobacco. "Thing is, we don't take kindly to outsiders, especially the kind that think they can just sit in here like they belong." The black man finally turned to face them. His expression was calm, unreadable. If he was afraid, he wasn't showing it. "I'm just having a drink, same as you." The leader narrowed his eyes. His jaw tensed as if he was debating how far he wanted to push this. There was something about the way the man in front of him carried himself that put him on edge. He had expected nervousness, maybe even a hint of fear. Instead, he got nothing. That's so. A tense silence followed. The bartender took a step back, his hand hovering near the phone under the counter. He knew where this was heading. He had seen it before. The leader's lip curled into a smirk. He grabbed the black man's drink and casually poured it out onto the floor. "Looks like your drink's done." The bar was dead silent now. Even the jukebox had stopped. The only sound was the steady drip of bourbon hitting the worn wooden floor. Slowly, the black man looked down at his empty glass. His fingers tightened around it for just a second before he released it. Then, he turned his gaze back to the leader, meeting his eyes with a look so steady that it sent an uneasy ripple through the group. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. The leader scoffed. "Oh, I'm real sure." A moment passed. Then another. The bartender took an unconscious step back. The black man exhaled through his nose, shook his head slightly, and turned back toward the counter. "Then do what you came to do." The leader frowned, not expecting that response. His hand twitched at his side. The tension was razor-thin now, stretched to its breaking point. And then it snapped. The punch came fast and hard, knuckles slamming against the side of the black man's jaw. A sharp crack echoed through the bar. He staggered slightly but caught himself against the counter. A few gasps sounded from the back of the room. The bartender cursed under his breath. The black man lifted a hand to his lip, feeling the warmth of blood trickling from a small cut. He sucked in a slow breath, letting the metallic taste settle on his tongue. Still, he didn't fight back. The leader stepped closer, towering over him now. "What, cat got your tongue?" The black man chuckled. A low, amused sound. "No, I'm just thinking." "Thinking about what?" "Thinking about how this is going to end for you." The leader's smirk faltered just a little. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" The black man didn't answer. Instead, he wiped the blood from his lip, turned back to the bar, and calmly signaled for another drink. The leader's nostrils flared. He didn't like being ignored. "You got some kind of death wish or something?" "No." "Then what the hell is wrong with you?" Another smirk. "You'll find out soon enough." The uneasy feeling in the leader's gut grew stronger. Something was off. He just couldn't put his finger on what. But by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. The atmosphere in Sullivan's bar was thick with unspoken tension. The patrons who had been watching from the corners of the dimly lit room pretended to return to their drinks. But the weight of anticipation hung in the air. The bartender, a man who had worked behind this counter long enough to recognize trouble before it unfolded, glanced toward the telephone beneath the bar. His fingers twitched as he weighed the decision of whether to make a call. The black man sitting at the counter hadn't moved since he wiped the blood from his lip. His posture remained relaxed, almost too relaxed given the situation. He took a slow sip of his freshly poured drink, letting the liquor burn as it went down. The leader of the gang clenched his jaw. He had been in plenty of fights before. Fistfights, bar brawls, late-night scuffles in parking lots. But something about this was different. The man in front of him wasn't reacting the way he was supposed to. He was supposed to be afraid. He was supposed to look for a way out. Instead, he looked like he was waiting. The leader scoffed, shaking his head as he turned to his men. "Look at this tough guy, acting like he's above it all." The men surrounding him chuckled, though their laughter lacked the confidence it had before. The black man finally spoke, his voice calm. "Are we done here?" The leader's expression darkened. He didn't like being dismissed. Done, not even close. He stepped closer, his breath hot and thick with the scent of whiskey. His fingers twitched as if they were itching to strike again. You don't get to walk in here and act like you own the place. I never said I did. But you sure as hell act like it. The black man took another sip of his drink. He could feel the anticipation in the air, the expectation of a violent response. He wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I'm just here for a drink. Same as you. The leader sneered. Same as me, ha, that's real funny. See, the difference between us is I belong here. You don't. The bartender tensed, shifting his weight uncomfortably. He had seen men like the leader before, men who carried their hatred like a badge of honor. The black man finally turned his head to meet the leader's stare directly. His eyes were steady, unshaken. And what makes you think that? The leader leaned in even closer, his breath hot and slow. Because I said so. The bar remained silent. Even the men flanking the leader seemed to be waiting, uncertain. The black man exhaled through his nose, placing his glass back down on the counter. If that's the best argument you've got, I'm disappointed. The leader's lip curled. The mocking tone cut deeper than any insult. You got a real smart mouth. Let's see if you still got that attitude when you're on the ground. His hand shot out, gripping the front of the black man's shirt, twisting the fabric between his fingers. The bartender took a sharp breath. This was it. But the black man didn't fight back. He didn't move at all. He sat there, completely still, looking up at the man who had just grabbed him with something that was neither fear nor anger. It was something else entirely. It was patience. The leader's grip tightened as if he was daring the man to react. What, you too scared to hit back? No. Then why aren't you fighting? Because I don't need to. The leader's jaw twitched. Tough guy, huh? You think you're better than me? No. Then why the hell are you just sitting there? The black man tilted his head slightly. Because I'm giving you a chance to walk away. The leader let out a bark of laughter, shaking his head. Oh, that's rich. You're giving me a chance. That's right. The leader's face twisted into a snarl. He was losing control of the situation and he knew it. The dominance he had counted on wasn't landing the way it should have. His men were watching him, waiting for him to take control. But the black man's steady calm was throwing everything off balance. And that only made him angrier. You're either the dumbest son of a bitch I've ever met or the craziest. Neither. I'm just a man having a drink. The leader had had enough. He shoved the black man backward, making him stumble slightly against the bar stool. The sound of the stool scraping against the wooden floor echoed through the silent room. The bartender flinched. Other patrons shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped in. The leader cracked his knuckles. I don't know where you came from, but let me make one thing clear. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a low growl. Men like you don't belong in places like this. The black man looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something no one expected. He smiled. A slow, knowing smile that made something cold crawl up the leader's spine. You really believe that, don't you? I know it. The black man exhaled softly. Then I guess tonight is going to be a real eye-opener for you. The leader's brow furrowed. What the hell did that mean? The bartender noticed it first. A flicker of red and blue lights flashing against the window. The leader's men started noticing too. Some of them turned toward the door. One of them muttered a curse under his breath. The leader, oblivious, was still focused on the black man in front of him. What the hell are you smirking at? The black man reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately. The leader's men tensed, ready for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small golden badge. The bartender froze. The leader blinked, his brain taking a moment to register what he was seeing. No, no, no way. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The black man turned the badge slowly between his fingers, letting the dim bar light reflect off the surface. FBI. The leader's stomach dropped. Every muscle in his body went rigid. You're lying. The black man flipped the badge closed, tucking it back into his jacket. Am I? The front door of the bar swung open with force. Uniformed officers flooded in, weapons drawn, voices barking orders. The gang didn't even have time to react before they were surrounded. The leader turned wildly, his eyes darting between his men. Some of them were already on their knees, hands behind their heads. Others were frozen, caught between fight and flight. His breathing came fast and shallow. No, 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 no. The black man took a slow sip of his drink. Told you this was going to be a real eye-opener. The leader turned back to him, his face red with rage. You set us up. The black man shrugged. No, you set yourselves up. The moment the FBI badge snapped shut, the entire bar seemed to shrink under the weight of what had just been revealed. For the leader of the gang, the reality of the situation hit like a slow-moving freight train, a collision he had never seen coming. His fists clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. He had been played. No, worse than that. He had walked straight into a trap. Around him, his men were frozen. Some of them exchanged panicked glances, waiting for someone to make a move, waiting for their leader to take control of the situation. But he had lost control the moment those flashing red and blue lights appeared outside. The black man sitting at the bar, no, the FBI agent, was still impossibly calm. He lifted his drink to his lips, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully, as if the room wasn't suffocating in tension, as if he hadn't just turned the tables on them in the most humiliating way possible. The leader felt something hot rise in his chest. Humiliation, fury, a deep, gnawing hatred that had been planted long ago and nurtured in dark corners of his life. He had spent years believing in power. His power, the kind that was supposed to make people like this man lower their eyes and step aside, not sit there and smirk at him. A hand clamped down on his shoulder. One of his men. Boss, what do we do? The leader didn't answer. His entire body was vibrating with rage, with disbelief. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. His eyes flicked to the officers pouring into the bar. Some were moving toward them, hands hovering near their weapons, ready to neutralize any resistance. And then he made a choice. A stupid, reckless choice. A choice made from the gut, not the brain. He pulled his fist back and swung. It was a powerful punch, one thrown by a man who had spent his entire life brawling. His knuckles connected with the agent's face, sending his head snapping sideways. The sound of impact echoed through the bar, sharp and sudden. Gasps filled the room. The bartender took an unconscious step back. The agent stumbled slightly, catching himself against the counter. For a moment, everything was still, and then all hell broke loose. The leader lunged again, driven by raw desperation. If he was going down, he wasn't going down easy. His second punch was aimed for the agent's ribs, but this time the agent moved. Fast. The leader's fist met empty air, and before he could recover, the agent struck. A swift, calculated counter. An elbow to the gut, knocking the air from the leader's lungs. A follow-up move, quick and brutal, sent him reeling backward, crashing into one of his own men. The gang hesitated for just a second, but that second was long enough for the officers to move in. Get down on the ground now. Hands where we can see them. Voices boomed through the chaos. The gang members scattered like rats in a trap, but there was nowhere to go. Officers grabbed them one by one, slamming them onto the sticky floor, pressing knees into backs, yanking arms behind heads. The leader, dazed but not beaten, struggled to his feet. His head was spinning, his ribs aching from the counterattack. And then he saw the agent standing in front of him, calm as ever, like he had expected this, like he had been waiting for it. Rage ignited again. His body moved before his mind could catch up. A snarl tore from his throat as he charged. This time the agent didn't move aside. He caught the leader mid-charge, redirecting his momentum with a swift pivot. The leader went crashing into the counter, pain exploding in his shoulder as bottles tumbled from the shelves, shattering on impact. Enough! An officer's voice cut through the commotion. The leader barely had time to react before he felt the cold steel of handcuffs snap around his wrists. His breath was coming in fast, uneven gasps. His mind was racing, spinning out, trying to process how quickly everything had turned to hell. The hands on his shoulders shoved him forward, forcing him to his knees. He struggled, but it was useless. The fight was over. He had lost. His head lifted, and through the haze of adrenaline and fury, he locked eyes with the agent. The agent looked down at him, expression unreadable. Told you this wasn't going to end well for you. The words weren't gloating. They weren't mocking. They were just the truth. The leader clenched his jaw so hard it felt like his teeth might crack. This isn't over. The agent's gaze didn't waver. Yeah, it is. The officers yanked the leader to his feet, dragging him toward the exit where squad cars and flashing lights waited. His men were being hauled out too, wrists bound, faces grim. The leader's head snapped toward the agent one last time. What the hell are you really doing here? The agent tilted his head slightly. Catching bad guys. The leader let out a bitter laugh. You think locking me up changes anything? The agent exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. No, but it's a start. The door swung open, and the leader was dragged into the night. Outside, the night was alive with flashing red and blue lights. The hum of police radios crackled through the air, mixing with the sharp voices of officers securing the scene. A handful of bystanders had gathered near the edge of the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion but hesitant to get too close. The leader of the gang, his wrists now locked in steel cuffs, stood rigid between two officers. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his breath coming in short, angry bursts. His face was flushed with humiliation, with disbelief, with a growing realization that the ground beneath him had completely shifted. He had come into the bar believing he was in control. Now he was the one being led away like a common criminal. The agent stepped outside, adjusting the sleeve of his jacket as he walked past the wreckage of overturned tables and shattered glass inside the bar. His movements were deliberate, measured. He had known this would happen. Maybe not every detail, maybe not the exact words exchanged, but he had known, from the moment he walked through that door, that this night would end with these men in cuffs. The leader turned his head sharply toward the agent, his body jerking slightly against the officers holding him. You think this makes you better than me? The agent met his eyes, his expression unreadable. I don't need to be better than you. I just needed you to do exactly what I knew you would do. The leader's jaw clenched. You set me up. The agent tilted his head slightly. No, I let you set yourself up. The leader's muscles tensed. He wanted to lunge, to fight, to regain some kind of upper hand, but the officers holding him didn't give him the chance. The truth was suffocating. It was pressing down on him from all sides. He had walked into his own downfall. The agent took a step closer, his voice calm, controlled. "We've been watching your group for months. We know what you've been up to. The threats, the intimidation, the violence. We have the messages, the videos, the connections. You weren't as careful as you thought you were." The leader's eyes flickered, just for a second too long. The agent saw it, that flicker of recognition, of fear buried beneath layers of defiance. And that was all he needed. The leader swallowed hard, his mind scrambling, running through all the possibilities. Who had talked, who had slipped up, what did they really know? The agent could see the panic settling in, the way the leader's nostrils flared, the way his fingers twitched in their restraints. "We've got everything. And now we have you." The leader let out a sharp breath, his chest rising and falling faster now. "You don't know anything." The agent gave him a small, almost pitying smile. "Keep telling yourself that." The officers moved, guiding the leader toward the waiting squad car. His feet dragged slightly, as if part of him still believed he could resist. But the weight of the cuffs, the presence of the officers, the cold night air pressing against his skin, it all made it real. He was done. One of his men, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and a nervous energy about him, was already being shoved into the back of a patrol car. His head jerked up when he saw the leader being led toward another vehicle. "Boss." The leader barely glanced at him. One of the other gang members, a younger guy with a long scar down his cheek, was still shouting, "This is bull, you can't do this." An officer pushed him forward. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The younger man gritted his teeth, his face contorted with rage, but he said nothing else. The agent watched it all unfold, his hands resting in his pockets, his stance steady. The leader turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "So what now? You think you put me away and everything changes?" The agent exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold night air. "I think tonight you finally learn that actions have consequences." The leader let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "You're delusional. People like you think you can fix the world. Think you can take guys like me off the streets and suddenly everything's better." The agent didn't blink. "No, but it's a start." The leader scoffed. "You want to know the truth, the real truth?" The agent said nothing. The leader leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "You think this is over, but there's always another. Always someone else ready to take the fight. You might have won tonight, but you'll never win the war." The agent's gaze didn't waver. "Maybe, but that's not your problem anymore." The officers pulled the leader back, forcing him toward the car. He struggled slightly, a last desperate attempt at resistance, but it was meaningless. The door slammed shut behind him. The agent stood there for a moment, watching as the squad car's taillights flickered before disappearing down the street. The night was quiet again. The agent let out a slow breath, rolling his shoulders back. The bartender stepped outside hesitantly, rubbing his hands together to fight the cold. "So that's it." The agent turned slightly. "For tonight." The bartender gave a small, almost weary chuckle. "Hell of a mess in there." The agent nodded. "Yeah. Sorry about that." The bartender waved a hand. "Not the worst I've seen." The agent took one last look around, then started toward his car. He knew the leader had been right about one thing. There would always be another fight, another battle, another long night that ended in flashing lights and the weight of someone's choices catching up to them. But that didn't mean the fight wasn't worth it. He pulled open his car door, slid inside, and started the engine. The road stretched ahead, dark and quiet. For now. The squad car's sirens wailed as it sped down the dimly lit streets, carrying the leader and his men toward the police station. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet pavement, casting eerie shadows against the walls of old buildings. The leader sat stiffly in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. His mind raced, but no matter how many ways he tried to twist the situation, one truth remained. He had lost. For years, he had walked through life with the belief that he was untouchable, that the rules didn't apply to him, that his power, rooted in fear and intimidation, was enough to keep people in line. Tonight had shattered that illusion. He turned his head slightly, glancing at his reflection in the plexiglass divider between him and the officers in the front seat. The man staring back at him wasn't the same one who had walked into that bar hours ago. That man had been in control. That man had been the hunter. Now he was just another prisoner being transported like cargo. The younger gang member, the one with the long scar down his cheek, sat beside him, breathing heavily. His knee bounced up and down as if he was struggling to contain his nerves. Every few minutes, he shot a glance toward the leader, looking for some kind of reassurance. The leader said nothing. His silence wasn't just anger. It wasn't just frustration. It was something deeper. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his own actions pressing down on him like a force he couldn't shake. This wasn't supposed to happen. The agent, that man, he had ruined everything. The leader turned his head sharply toward the window, trying to focus on anything but the growing knot in his stomach. Outside, the city blurred past. It looked the same as it always had: dark alleys, flickering streetlights, people walking with their heads down, lost in their own worlds. But for the first time, it felt different, like it was moving on without him. The car slowed as they approached a set of steel gates. A pair of uniformed officers stood by, waiting for the vehicle to enter the precinct. The gates creaked open, and the squad car rolled inside, pulling to a stop near the entrance of the holding facility. The doors unlocked with a sharp click. "Move." The leader hesitated for just a second before stepping out. The cold night air hit him immediately, sharp against his skin. The other gang members followed, their faces pale, their expressions hard but shaken. An officer grabbed his arm, leading him forward. The leader didn't resist, but his mind burned with the need to do something, anything, to regain some sense of control. The holding area was bright, too bright, a stark contrast to the dim bar where this had all started. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as the men were guided through a series of metal detectors and into a booking area. One by one, they were processed. The leader stared straight ahead as his mugshot was taken, as his fingerprints were recorded. He had seen men go through this before. He had laughed at them, mocked them, told himself he would never be one of them. Yet here he was. The agent walked in through the side door, his expression unreadable as he approached the counter. He exchanged a few quiet words with one of the officers before turning his attention to the leader. The leader smirked, though it was weaker than before. "Come to gloat." The agent folded his arms, leaning slightly against the counter. "No, I came to see if reality's sunk in yet." The leader let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You're real full of yourself, you know that." The agent didn't respond. The silence between them stretched. Then the agent spoke. "You had a choice tonight. You could have walked away. You could have left that bar, gone home, and woken up tomorrow free." The leader's smirk faded slightly. "But you didn't, because you don't know how to walk away, do you?" The leader looked away, clenching his fists. You think you've won. The agent let out a slow breath. I think you lost. The words cut deeper than the leader expected. The agent pushed off the counter, turning toward the door. Enjoy your night. You'll have plenty of time to think. The leader watched as the agent walked away, disappearing through the heavy metal doors leading back to the main precinct. For the first time, the reality of his situation settled into his bones. He wasn't getting out of this. Not tonight. Not anytime soon. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something that unsettled him more than anything else. Doubt. The cell door clanged shut with a hollow finality. The leader sat on the cold metal bench, staring at the gray cement walls in front of him. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows along the floor. The smell of disinfectant and sweat clung to the air, the unmistakable scent of confinement. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his cuffed hands hanging loosely between them. His knuckles were raw, bruised from the punches he had thrown at the bar. His ribs ached from the counterattack. But the pain in his body was nothing compared to the storm raging in his head. This wasn't supposed to happen. For years, he had played the game his way. Fear and control, power and intimidation. He had ruled his world with certainty, knowing that the system either looked the other way or wasn't strong enough to touch him. But now, sitting here in this freezing, windowless cell, he realized something that sent an unfamiliar chill through him. He had underestimated them. No, worse, he had underestimated him. The agent. He clenched his jaw, shaking his head. That man had walked into the bar alone. He had sat there, unbothered, unshaken, watching, waiting for the moment to let the trap spring shut. Had it all been a game to him? Had he known, from the moment he stepped through the door, that this was how it would end? The leader exhaled sharply, running his fingers through his short-cropped hair. His mind was racing, replaying every moment, trying to find the flaw in the setup. Had someone talked? Had they been watched for longer than he realized? Had he walked into a trap that had been waiting for him long before tonight? Footsteps echoed from the corridor outside the holding cells. Slow, measured. The leader straightened slightly, his ears trained to the sound. Then, just beyond the bars, the agent stepped into view. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The leader leaned back against the wall, exhaling through his nose. You really don't know when to quit, do you? The agent ignored the jab, standing with his hands in his pockets. You ever ask yourself why you do this? The leader scoffed. Do what? Hate. The word was so simple, but it landed like a punch to the gut. The leader's smirk faltered for a split second before returning, though weaker than before. Oh, come on. Spare me the moral lecture. The agent studied him. I'm not interested in lecturing you. I just wonder if you ever really thought about it. The leader shook his head, chuckling dryly. You FBI guys, always trying to get into people's heads. Think you can crack us like some kind of puzzle. Maybe. The leader scoffed again but didn't reply. The agent tilted his head slightly. You like to think you're the one in control, don't you? That you're the one making the rules. But tell me something. Did you ever really have control? Or was it just fear keeping everything in place? The leader's jaw clenched. You're real fond of hearing yourself talk. Huh? The agent leaned against the bars, folding his arms. You thought you had power because people feared you. But real power isn't fear. It's what happens when fear disappears. The leader's eyes flickered with something unreadable. And that's what scares you the most, isn't it? The leader exhaled, shifting on the bench. I don't scare easy. No? No. Then why do you look like a man who just realized he spent his whole life running from something? The leader's fists curled, but he didn't move. He forced a smirk. You think you've won? You think putting me in here changes anything? The agent's expression didn't waver. I think it changes everything for you. The leader scoffed but didn't reply. The agent studied him for a moment longer before pushing off the bars and stepping back. You'll have plenty of time to think about it. He turned, walking away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. The leader sat there for a long time after the agent was gone. The cell was silent. The fluorescent lights continued to hum overhead. For the first time in a long time, the leader wasn't sure what to do next. And that terrified him more than anything. The holding cell was silent except for the occasional shuffling of prisoners down the hall and the distant murmurs of officers processing paperwork. The leader sat on the metal bench, staring at the opposite wall, his hands still cuffed in front of him. Hours had passed, but time had lost its meaning. His mind was trapped in a loop, replaying every moment from the bar, every word exchanged, every step leading to this exact moment. No matter how many times he went over it, the conclusion was the same. He had lost. Not just the fight, not just the night, everything. Footsteps echoed outside the cell block. He didn't lift his head, didn't react, even as the heavy door to the corridor swung open and an officer stopped in front of his cell. On your feet. The leader didn't move right away. He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled, before pushing himself up. His joints ached from the hours of stillness, but he didn't show it. The officer stepped aside, and behind him, standing with the same steady presence as before, was the agent. The leader's lips curled slightly. Back for another round? The agent's expression didn't change. He nodded toward the officer, who stepped in and unlocked the cell. The metal door groaned as it swung open. Let's take a walk, the agent said. The leader raised an eyebrow. Where to? You'll see. For a split second, he considered resisting just to prove a point, but he knew it wouldn't get him anywhere. So instead, he stepped forward, his hands still bound in front of him. The officer grabbed his arm, guiding him out into the corridor. They walked in silence. The precinct was quieter than he expected, the energy calmer now that the initial chaos of the arrests had passed. The leader could feel the stares of officers they passed, but he ignored them. He kept his eyes forward, following the agent's lead. Finally, they reached a small, dimly lit room. A metal table sat in the center, 2 chairs on opposite sides. A single overhead light flickered slightly, casting long shadows against the walls. The officer gestured for him to sit. He hesitated but did as instructed. The agent sat across from him, setting a folder down on the table. The leader's eyes flicked to it. What's that? My fan mail? The agent didn't smile. He flipped the folder open, revealing a stack of photographs. Some were grainy surveillance images, others clearer. Men shaking hands in parking lots, groups gathered in dimly lit rooms, weapons being exchanged. The leader's smirk faltered slightly. You built quite the operation, the agent said, tapping a photo near the top. Connections in multiple states, supply chains, recruitment. You weren't just another street gang. You were trying to build something bigger. The leader leaned back in his chair. So what? You got a couple of pictures. That doesn't mean anything. The agent didn't respond. He turned another page, revealing a stack of documents. Financial records, transactions traced to your people, weapon shipments, anonymous donors. Do you know how long we've been piecing this together? The leader's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. 2 years, the agent continued. 2 years of tracking movements, following leads, watching you recruit, expand. We weren't just after you tonight. We were after the entire network. And guess what? He flipped another page. We got them. The leader's stomach clenched. Your men? The ones you trusted? The agent shook his head. They're talking. Maybe not all of them, but enough. The leader's fingers curled into fists. He didn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. They wouldn't. The agent tilted his head. Wouldn't they? He slid another sheet across the table. This is a signed statement from one of your guys. He's taking a deal, reducing his sentence in exchange for everything he knows. And believe me, he knows a lot. The leader's heart pounded against his ribs. The agent leaned forward slightly. So here's the deal. You're looking at serious time. Federal time. This isn't just a bar fight. This is conspiracy, trafficking, organized crime. You're done. The leader gritted his teeth. But, the agent continued, you have a choice. You can go down alone or you can talk. Help us take down the rest of this network, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have a shot at something less than life in a cage. The leader's breathing was shallow now. His mind raced, searching for an angle, a way out. He wanted to spit some defiant response, some last show of strength. But the truth was sinking in, wrapping around him like chains. They had him, and worse than that, they had his people. This was the end. He sat there for a long time, staring at the table, at the pictures, at the cold, hard evidence that his world had already crumbled. The agent didn't rush him. He just waited. Finally, the leader exhaled through his nose, slow and long. His shoulders sagged slightly, the weight pressing down harder than ever. Guess I was wrong about you, he muttered. The agent lifted an eyebrow. How's that? The leader let out a hollow chuckle. I thought you were just another suit, another Fed trying to make a name for himself. But you played the long game. You knew how this would end before I even walked into that bar. Didn't you? The agent didn't answer. He didn't have to. The leader shook his head, laughing softly to himself. Damn. The room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, the leader leaned forward, resting his cuffed hands on the table. All right, he said. Let's talk. The agent nodded. Because in the end, that was the real fight. Not the punches thrown in a bar. Not the bravado, not the threats. It was the fight for control, for influence, for power. And tonight, the agent had won. But he knew, as he listened to the leader finally break, that there would always be another fight, another battle, another night where the weight of justice would press down on men who thought they were untouchable. The road was long, but for now this one was over. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters.